Hello, everyone, and welcome to ADAA's webinar, Living Well with Bipolar Disorder. My name is Jolie Busby, and I'm the Education and Training Manager here at ADAA. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Gabe Howard. Gabe is an award-winning podcast host, author, and sought-after speaker who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 2003 after being committed to a psychiatric hospital. He is the author of Mental Illness is an Asshole and Other Observations, as well as the host of the Inside Bipolar podcast from Healthline.com. In November of 2022, Gabe had the distinct honor of speaking at Oxford University in England. He is the recipient of Mental Health America's Norman Guthrie Award and received a resolution from the governor of Ohio naming him an everyday hero. Welcome, Gabe, and thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh, I didn't mean to
Absolutely.
interrupt. I know I'm already, it's already started. I've already ruined the interview.
I think we're off to a fabulous beginning, and I know you have so much to share. My first question, though, is if you could, in your own words, describe bipolar disorder to our audience.
Yeah, so this is always like a really tough one because people think they know what bipolar disorder is, right? It's a word it's an illness, it's a disorder, it's a word that is really well represented in culture. I don't think if you'd walk up to anybody and say, "Hey, do you know what bipolar disorder is?" that anybody would say no. But the vast majority should really say, I've heard of it, but I don't know that I understand it. And here's why. So bipolar disorder is often described as highs and lows, right? The two poles. So you've got like your suicidal depression, you've got your elevated mood states of hypomania and mania. So for me, it's godlike mania. I'm consequence free environment. I think I am the center of the universe, all the way down to suicidal depression, where instead of thinking that I'm God, I think that I'm garbage. And that is what generally people understand. However, there's where it gets incomplete. It's also everything in between. You sort of vacillate on that spectrum. I can't decide if I want to do it this way or this way. I've got to figure that out. The microphone's in my way. That's a problem. But so you've got your godlike mania, and you've got your suicidal depression, and then there's just everything in the middle. There's everything on almost manic, almost depressed, a little low, a little high, right smack dab in the middle where you're normal, stereotypical, average, and again, everything in between. And then on top of all of that, and this is really important as well, on top of all of that, you have normal emotions. You're not depressed, you're just sad. You're not manic, you're just excited. All of those fit on top of it as well. And then finally, just when you think that it can't get any worse, there's these little symptoms like grandiosity, hypersexuality, and things of that nature. Psychosis is a potential symptom. And all of that converges on top of you and your personality to give you a bipolar diagnosis. So it's not just highs and lows. I mean, that's really the bottom line.
That was a great description of the depth and breadth of the illness. Well, thank you for that. And people talk a lot about medication. So is medication the only treatment for bipolar disorder?
It is not the only treatment, and it is an important one. Like I don't, for what I'm about to say, I want to make sure the audience doesn't hear, oh, it's not important. He's saying it's not important. It is absolutely an important treatment. But it is not the only one. If you just take your medicine as prescribed, even if it's the correct medicine, you're not going to reach the level of recovery and wellness that you want. Things like peer support, things like therapy, things like learning coping skills, things like introspection, just doing things for yourself. Of course, you're still a person, so health and wellness still applies to you. Diet and exercise is obviously very important for all humans. That includes people living with bipolar disorder. You really need all of these things. That medicine just gets the most discussion. And then there's this group of people that's like, well, medicine is the most important. Medicine is the most important. And I really think that that's it. Jolie, it kind of reminds me if somebody says, what's the most important utility in your house? Is it water? Is it electric? Right? Is it sewage? Is it the internet? Is it satellite cable streaming? Whatever. And any reasonable person would be like, that is dumb. Because if you're missing any one of those things, you're in a bad mood. And the one that becomes the most important is the one you're missing. Nobody cares about their electricity until they flip that switch and the light doesn't come on. And then suddenly, because it's missing, it's the most important. That's really how it is with medication and with managing bipolar disorder. Whatever's missing tends to be the most important.
I appreciate you saying that because just anecdotally, some will say, well, why can't they just take their medication? If they took their medication, they wouldn't have any symptoms.
Wouldn't that be excellent? Like the just how much time you have. I got a little rabbit hole that I like to fall down here, and it's a fun little thing. So people always say, why can't people with bipolar disorder just be med compliant? We won't have these problems. I have figured it out. This is an exciting moment for you and your audience because I'm about to solve the entire bipolar disorder crisis right on this webinar right now. Everybody take notes. I have friends who are psychiatrists, which means they can write prescriptions. And I asked one of them, hey, will you prescribe every single person with bipolar disorder one M&M a day? That's it. They just have to eat a single M&M every day and bipolar disorder will be cured. And of course, the reason that will be cured is because they will be med compliant. Everybody will eat the M&M. M&Ms are delicious. And that's all they have to do. Now, any reasonable person listening to this should be like, okay, this dude has lost his mind. That you can't give sick people M&Ms and expect them to get well. You're absolutely right. But this is how come saying if they're just med compliant, they'll be better is not, it's a foolish thing to say. Because if a doctor wrote for one M&M a day and the person took it, they would in fact be med compliant. But nobody would have any expectation of wellness by following that treatment. And that's what I point over to the other side. If you're not taking the correct medications, you're not going to get well. And we don't really have a discussion of that with bipolar disorder. It's always take your medicines and you'll be well. There's no discussion on should psychiatrists prescribe the right medications. Are psychiatrists prescribing the right medications? How long does it take to find the right medications? How long do you have to be med compliant before the medications start working? Is it literally you take one pill and poof, this problem is resolved? Or does it take the medication time to reach efficacy levels? What about people who are on multiple medications? Can you prescribe them all at once, or does it take time to find that right cocktail? All of those discussions are missing in this simple statement of just take your meds and you'll be fine. At the bare minimum, it should be just take the correct medications and you'll be fine. But we even remove that. We make it sound like if you're doing poorly, it's your fault. And if you're doing well, it's the amazing medicine and medical team. So there's really no way for us, the people living with bipolar disorder, to ever get credit for our wellness. And perhaps more importantly, there's no way to assign blame to anybody else for when we're doing poorly. So if you live with bipolar disorder, you never get credit for your success, and nobody else ever has to accept any responsibility for any sickness, disorder, or issues that you have. So it's a great spot to be. Just love it here.
Well, you described the situation really well in terms of taking responsibility for that and how people perceive it. But I wanted to go back to something because we talked about medication, but you also talked about, you're a whole person, you're a human, and you take care of yourself. Can you talk a little bit about what sleep and diet and exercise do, or how they help for a bipolar disorder patient?
Yeah. So first and foremost, we're humans. So all of the research out there about things that benefit humans are gonna benefit people with bipolar disorder. For some reason, we have removed mental health and put it over here, and we put physical health over here, and we pretend like both of those things don't live in a single human. You can't really separate them out, yet for reasons that we just don't have time to get into here, we think our physical health and our mental health is separated. I want to be very clear. It is not. So when we talk about the things that impact the mood of any living person, right? So forget about bipolar disorder for a moment. Let's pretend, Jolie, that every morning you get up and you eat cake for breakfast. And then for lunch, you have Doritos. And then for dinner, you have greasy fried food. Now, I don't mean like on your birthday or on vacation or as a celebration. I mean, this is your food
Mhm.
every single day. That's all you eat. In addition to that, you never move. You just sit 24/7. And then on top of that, you don't sleep well. You sleep on a couch. Your back always hurts. You're just not getting good sleep. Now, remember, you do not have bipolar disorder, right? I don't know that for sure, but I'm you the
Right.
person we are talking about does not live with bipolar disorder.
Right.
Nobody would expect that person to be mentally well. Nobody would think that that person is going to feel good or have a lot of energy. Maybe you can get away with that when you're a teenager, but especially as we age 25, 30, 35, 40, that's just not the kind of lifestyle that's going to lead to wellness or to lead to a good life. Now put bipolar disorder on top of that. Right. So if you live with bipolar disorder and the foods that you eat and the sleep that you're getting and your sedentary lifestyle is will just giving you lethargy, you are that much closer to the precipice that you can fall off of. And that's really important. Remember, depression is a really big thing with bipolar disorder. So moving a couple inches in the direction of depression could be the difference between depression grabbing a hold of you and yanking you down, or depression kind of reaching at you and clawing a little. And while that's frustrating and annoying and aggravating, it's just not getting its grips into you enough to make you, for example, suicidal, which is a really, really big concern. So look, if you hear nothing else from that long speech, it's that people with bipolar disorder are human, and things like diet, exercise, sleep, hygiene are important to all humans, meaning they're equally important for people with bipolar disorder. And of course, because we're managing an illness, it might even be more so.
I appreciate you saying that. I think a lot of us overlook that part. And while I don't eat Doritos and cake every day, although that sounds delightful occasionally, you're right. Even without bipolar disorder, I think I would feel pretty miserable afterwards. Well, let's switch gears just a little bit and let's talk about mania, which sounds like a remarkable experience with lots of creative thoughts and bursts of energy, the ability to achieve these great things at a rapid pace. Is that true?
It's not. I mean, half of it is. There's a little piece of it that's true, right? You do feel like that's happening. The reality is that's not happening so much.
Mm.
Feelings are not facts. You feel creative, you feel productive, and you absolutely unequivocally are moving at this incredibly high rate of speed. But by and large, you're not accomplishing much. Now there's always the exception. There's always the, well, when I was manic, I got this idea, and that idea has real value. Inspiration, and that's the word I really want people to focus on. Inspiration can come from anywhere, but it doesn't make the thing that inspired you a good thing. The example that I always use and that I really like to use is John Walsh. John Walsh, for those who don't know, has led the charge on kidnap prevention, on keeping children safe. Code Adam, which is a thing, a protocol that you see in retail stores for if somebody's child goes missing and trying to find that child quickly to make sure that there's a difference between your child wandered off and there's a difference between somebody's trying to leave the store with your child. That all came because John Walsh's child was murdered. And if I ever got on a podcast and said, well, I think it's great that his child was murdered because we got all these incredible initiatives, everybody would be like, what is wrong with this man? And they should. That'd be a horrible thing to say. But something good did come out of it. John Walsh, again, these initiatives have kept children safe and have no doubt saved lives. But that doesn't retroactively make the thing that inspired it, remember, there's that word again, a
Mhm.
good thing. So maybe you'll be inspired by something that happened when you're manic, but by and large, the people who are manic, they're not accomplishing much. And in fact, they're doing real damage. This is where you hear about your spending sprees. This is where you hear about people quitting their job because they've got the next $1 million idea. This
Mm.
is where you hear about people leaving their families because they just don't understand me. They don't understand me. This is where you hear about people making horrific financial and personal life decisions, all because the mania convinced them that this was the best thing to do. But as soon as the dust settles, it probably wasn't. I say probably because it's not a lock, but more often than not.
That is really interesting to hear, the difference between what may be going on in someone's mind and thinking, and the perception versus the reality. And I'm sure the families and friends of those that are experiencing mania are appreciate what you have to say on that. Well, you talked about inspiration and work related outcomes. So let's talk a little bit about bipolar disorder and any specific professions or career paths where individuals with bipolar disorder may thrive.
That's always a really, really hard one. And here's why. Let's say that you and I were having a conversation, and I said, "Can you tell me any sort of career path or profession where women may thrive?" You're going to think to yourself, that kind of sounds some sort of way. What if I said where minorities might thrive? You're like, "Oh, Gabe, what are you doing? Like now we're going to have to cut." But then it's like, well, where will people with bipolar disorder thrive? Well, I don't know. They're going to thrive where individuals thrive. There's lots of stuff bandied about where people who are hypermanic, they're the life of the party. They have a lot of charisma, and that's why they gravitate towards sales jobs. And look, there may be an ounce of truth to that. If you lined up all the people with bipolar disorder, you might see an uptick in jobs that are stereotypically beneficial for extroverts, but that's really irrelevant if you're the type of bipolar, if you have the type of that. But that's really irrelevant if you are an introvert person with bipolar disorder. You're like, I don't want to go into public speaking. I don't want to go into sales. I don't want to go into customer service. I don't want to work retail. But everybody's like, no, 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 no. Women are really good with children. I'm sorry. People with bipolar disorder are really good at extroverted jobs. So I always try to be very, very careful with stuff like that. Look, there is probably, and I'm sure people have it because people track everything. There is probably something to be said where external facing jobs, jobs that take a lot of personality, dealing with the public, people persons, there probably are more people diagnosed with bipolar disorder there than in other places. But I would caution that one, it doesn't matter. If it's not for you, it's not for you. And two, I would caution the people that are kind of stereotyping people that you got to be like really, really careful. And that includes people living with bipolar disorder. I mean, could you imagine if I was that introverted type and I didn't like it and I thought, well, I do have bipolar disorder, so I'm going to apply for a job that I know I hate because somebody said that people with bipolar disorder really thrive in these environments. So I like to be really, really careful of that. And then finally, the last thing that I want to say is, stats have a way of statistics have a way of showing the things that we think we want to see, but maybe they don't. I look at the LGBTQ plus community. We have a lot of data from them, and the data really, so for a period of time, the data showed that members of that community were doing really well in the arts. But in actuality, that's not what it showed. What it showed is that the arts were more liberal and they were more accepting, and that people could come out in those environments. It turns out now that we have more time that there's plenty of members of the LGBTQIA plus community who are football players, who are elite athletes, who love to lift weights, who do all kinds of other things. But the data couldn't show that. So people with bipolar disorder are able to be openly bipolar if they're in sales because people see that as a plus. But maybe people with bipolar disorder are not able to be open as defense attorneys or surgeons because people would be like, you know what, I don't want some person with bipolar disorder operating on my brain. No, 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 no. I don't want my lawyer to go crazy in the middle of my trial. So it would behoove the people with bipolar disorder to not tell. Whereas over in this other environment, they have this ability to share. And that's really what I want to make sure that people understand. The statistics, I'm not saying that they're lying or that they're being misrepresented, but they may not tell the whole story. And we have to be open to that because we've seen it with other marginalized communities. We've seen it in other advocacy efforts. And we really need to understand that that may well be the case. And this all just boils down to make the decision that's best for you in the moment so that you can lead your best life.
I really appreciate that. There's sometimes a tendency to put people in a box, regardless of personality type or what we're perceived as, or our health condition, or male, female, whatever. And I appreciate you expounding on that, because not many people like being put in a box. So thank you
Plus,
for
this
that.
is so limiting. I mean, how
Yes, it
boring
is.
would life be if
Mhm.
everybody with bipolar disorder went to work in, extroverted places? I mean, just like sincerely, I mean, life would just be so boring. I often look back at, other generations, and they're like, well, women were expected to do this, men were expected to do this. And I was like, how boring must that have been? I don't know, like my grandfather's generation, just he went to work all day with men, just men, just just
Mm.
just all men, and not for nothing, all white men. I just all white men about his age, and all white men who were also family men. They were all doing the same things, right? So they all had
Just
wives, they all had kids, I mean, just I look, my grandfather was a happy guy. I'm not trying to like insult him or his generation, but from my perspective, I go to work with single people, married people without kids, people with kids. I mean, just single people with kids, men, women. I mean, there's all these neat people I get to meet. But my grandfather's stories are all exactly the same. A whole bunch of men with the wife and
mm,
the kids at the house. You're all the same. You're just all the same. I don't
not
know.
much in the way of diversity.
It's for zero diversity. Let's be zero diversity. But it just must have been so boring. I don't know. I mean, again, he was a very, very happy guy. I'm not trying to insult an entire generation. But from my perspective, how boring. Go out and
Maybe
do what you
he
want.
just didn't know what he was missing,
Exactly. Exactly.
which underscores, I think, the importance of so many diversity initiatives now that expand our opportunities. Well, we talked about perception and how people see others, whether they're famous or just someone they know every day. But let's talk about a more famous person. World Bipolar Day falls on Vincent van Gogh's birthday. And you've shared your concerns about the rewriting of his story to make it a romantic or inspirational one. And some scholars believe that he wasn't bipolar at all. So, what do you think?
This is always a really tough one. So the first thing that I want to say unequivocally is this idea that we can go back in history and diagnose somebody who we never sat down and discussed this with, who we never asked questions, who we never personally observed, is concerning to me. Hard stop. Because you can see the implications of this. Could you imagine if we started watching celebrities or politicians on television and determined and gave them medical diagnoses just based on that? Notice I didn't say mental health. I just said a medical diagnosis. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't suspect or can't wonder or be concerned about. I'm not pretending that we can't have opinions. We are, but imagine if you could just watch somebody on television and say that person has heart disease, and then you rushed them into surgery. You put them on medication, and you're just like, but did you talk to the person? Did you run any tests? Did you do any of the things that you need to do? Oh no, we just know for a fact they have heart disease. Why? Well, because we saw this speech once where he did XYZ. Well, I agree that that might be a good reason to check it out, but you did go further and check it out, right? Nope. We just mailed him pills and operated on him. And anybody reasonable person hearing this is like, that's horrific. That nobody
Mhm.
should ever do that. And yet we love to go back in time and say, hey, I bet he had bipolar disorder. Now, one thing that we know unequivocally is that mental health wise, Vincent van Gogh wasn't doing well. He wasn't. He was not doing well. But we never really got to observe him in the context of his time. We're always applying the standards of today onto behavior that he had back then. And maybe, again, I don't know because I didn't live back then and I didn't talk to Vincent van Gogh, but maybe we would find out that it was something different. Maybe it was, I know that's a weird way to say this, maybe it was just depression. Did he have an alcohol problem? We can't tell. Maybe he didn't have mental illness at all. Maybe he was, just somebody who is suffering from addiction. And we've gone in a completely different direction. Maybe he had schizophrenia. Maybe he had psychosis. And all of this boils down to the thing that concerns me. I really believe and this is a controversial thing. I really believe that one of the reasons that we think that he has bipolar disorder or had bipolar disorder is because of the art. And it's a little bit of a form of stigma. If he behaved exactly the way that he behaved, but produced no art, I think society would believe that he had schizophrenia. But because he created this beautiful art, we believe that this must have come from mania. It must have come from mania. Now, there are also other indicators. You don't need to write me letters. I know that it was described that he had manic phases where he would just produce this incredible amount of art, which does lead to mania. But there was also no TV back then. There weren't a lot of things to occupy his time. So it's just all of these things are really difficult for me to say unequivocally he had bipolar disorder. And if I may, I know this has become sort of an unwieldy answer, but I really think that they wanted to give him bipolar disorder because it's cool. I know that's like it's cool. He was bipolar. He had mania and bursts of creativity and sparks of madness. And that sounds beautiful. And what's left out of his story is the fact that he died by suicide. So you know all that stuff that I just said? They're like, well, it led him to beautiful art. Well, yeah, and to die. It led him to end his life. Like the people who loved him lost him because of bipolar disorder. Right, but the starry night. No, the death of a loved one. Right, his art was so beautiful. No, somebody lost somebody they loved. And that's where I get frustrated, because when I try to focus the story to the tragedies of his life, people are like, right, 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 right. But did you see the canvas? Did you see the canvas? And there is the part that concerns me.
Yeah, as it should. The romanticization, I guess, of someone's story. It's a cautionary tale there, not to get too far down the road. Well, thank you for sharing that, because um, stories like that can influence how other people see things. So thank you for your insights on that. And one thing that Vincent van Gogh did not have was access to resources very much at his time, or whatever resources were available. And so two questions really, or two parts. Um, One is about what resources or organizations maybe that have helped you along your way. And then the second part to that is if you personally have experienced or know of experiences where the socioeconomic factors that someone maybe experiences influences their access to resources, and what that means for bipolar disorder.
Yeah, so this is a really, really big question. So the first thing I want to say is I'm going to give out a couple of national places that have helped me, and I'm going national because I know that there's people all over the country and world who could be watching this. But you should Google. You should Google and find. I can't recommend them because I don't live in everybody's city and state, but I only want to point this out because there are so many incredible local resources that serve their local community, like Fountain House in New York City or the Peer Center in Columbus, Ohio. Unfortunately, you've got to live in Columbus, Ohio or New York City to benefit from them. But nationally, the DBSA, the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, huge fan. Mental Health America, huge fan. And then NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They're great for family members. My parents, they needed so much help. And they're expanding out to peers, people like me, and they have great classes that are medically reviewed and held to a rigorous standard for both loved ones of people with mental illness and for people like me. Mental Health America, DBSA, excellent classes for people living with well, we're talking about bipolar, so living with bipolar, but really living with mental health conditions. So those are the big three: Mental Health America, the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, or DBSA, and NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Recommend all of them without any hesitation whatsoever. But I do strongly suggest that you try to find resources in your local community, because those can be really, really specific to your community and could do a better job of getting you what you need. Because again, they understand your local community instead of having to expand out to a national footprint. Socioeconomics. Oh, here's the reality. The amount of resources, the amount of money that you have is going to determine how well you do with bipolar disorder. That's just a fact. If you have more money, more resources, and so a support system, and live in the right zip code, your chances of managing bipolar disorder and reaching recovery are frankly significantly higher than if you're missing all of those pieces. I talk a lot about how lucky I am. So the first thing is when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I had health insurance. That was luck, right? When I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I had money. That was luck. When I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I had a stable mom and dad who loved me and were there to support me. That was luck. When I was diagnosed, when I had my bipolar diagnosis, or when I had my crisis with bipolar disorder, I was in a big city that had lots of hospitals and lots of resources. That was luck. When I showed up at the emergency room, they had a bed open. That was luck. When I got there, the right people were there because they had them on staff 24 hours, again, because of that big city, where they could send a social worker over, they could send a psychiatrist over, they could have me evaluated by the right people instead of an overwhelmed ER person who was dealing with, car accidents and heart attacks and maybe didn't understand to the level that I needed, who could have accidentally sent me away because this is not their area of expertise and they're overwhelmed. So the fact that that didn't happen, all luck. I don't think this should come down to luck. If any one of those things would have changed for me, we might not be talking. That is just a hard stop. If I would have had no insurance, it's possible that they wouldn't have admitted me. They would have found a reason to, say that I was fine to go home. Because after all, if they admitted me, they weren't going to get paid. If I didn't have any money or resources when I got out, I went to a 6-week program when I got out. Well, that means I didn't go to work for 6 weeks. So bills still need to be paid. The world does not care if you're sick. I had the money and the resources to overcome that and go to those specialized medical care programs. I also had the health insurance to pay for them because you can imagine these things cost thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars. My parents were immediately there to support me. Just with for better, for worse. I'm not saying that they did everything right, but they were there. As I'm very fond of saying, they made lots of mistakes. But in order to make mistakes, you have to be present. You cannot make a mistake if you abandon your child. My parents made mistakes because they were there and they were trying, and bipolar disorder is huge. And yeah, a lot of us made a lot of mistakes. This is not fair. I should not be special. I didn't earn it. I don't deserve it. I didn't work harder. That is just all BS that people like to say. Here's the reality. I was lucky. I was born into the right family. I had the right job, the right money. I got sick at the right time. I lived in the right city, and I got connected with the right people accidentally. Yeah. All accidentally. It should not come down to luck. Hard stop. And it absolutely does.
So just thinking about that, some of the resources that you mentioned are, to your knowledge, are there resources available for those who may not have that inherent luck at the time of crisis?
So here's where it gets really, really difficult. The answer to that question is yes, there are resources available. And you think, okay, Gabe, shut up. The answer is yes, right? Herein lies the problem. Society hears that there are resources available and they don't ask the follow-up question, which is, are there enough resources available? Mm-hmm. It reminds me of, I worked in a homeless shelter for a while. And it was, so I worked in the homeless system, right? There's lots of different resources that support the unhoused in Columbus, Ohio. So one, I want to be very clear, this is a story taking place in Central Ohio. And one year when there was some extra budget around Christmas, the local politicians decided that they were going to donate, like $25,000 or $50,000 to, or donate or move into the homeless system, this pile of money. And you would think, well, that's good, right? We all begged them. We went, we pleaded, please do not give us this money. This is, every single homeless charity right now is in the middle of begging, literally begging for money. And if the headline goes out that a big pile of money was donated or was given by the government, people will think, oh, They don't need the money, and they will donate it to another charity that didn't get the money. And we need our capital campaigns across all of them are like, $2 million. And you're moving in like $25,000, $50,000, but that's enough to sway public opinion. So please, God, don't give us the money. 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 They gave us the money. And we were down. Our fundraising efforts were down because it created this public perception that we were well funded. There's this public perception that the mental health safety net is well funded. It's not. It does save people, absolutely. And then those people go out like me and are on webinars, and we talk about how we were saved by those systems.
Yeah.
The system did in fact save me. But I like to be very, very clear that for every one of me, there's dozens of people that fell through gaping holes. I also like to be clear that the mental health safety net, people talk about how the system is broken. I want to be very clear. The system is not broken. It's working exactly how it was built to work. It finds people in crisis, it stabilizes them, and it lets them go. Now, stabilization is a far cry from wellness. It's a far cry from recovery. Could you imagine if you had a heart attack, they stabilized you, and they sent you home? You would just have another heart attack. And then when you do that, they just talk about, well, the problem with these heart patients is they're just constantly, they're always calling, and nobody ever stopped to say, look, the system just stabilizes them. It doesn't fix their heart problem. It doesn't address their high blood pressure. It doesn't fix the valve. It doesn't give them heart surgery. It doesn't, whatever caused the issue, nobody addressed. They just stabilized you and sent you home. So of course it's going to happen again. And then we just blame you because it happened again. Now, anybody hearing that story is like, oh my God, that's horrific. You're just stabilizing heart attack patients and sending them home. That's horrible. This is what we do for people with bipolar disorder, people with serious mental illness. We just stabilize them and send them on their way. And then when it happens again, we blamed them for not getting better, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what we'll do for sure at the end of this presentation is include all the links that we have to resources that people can look into. I know you have a few that you've mentioned that we'll be sure to include those links. But it is definitely a challenging situation across the mental health and physical health situation in this country and beyond. So thank you for that. One of the resources, of course, I have to bring up is ADAA. So my question for you as we wrap up our session is, why did you want to share your story with ADAA?
Oh, first off, I want to share my story with everybody. I hate to say it that way because I'm on your show right now, so I feel like I should like suck up a little. But no, sincerely, I want to tell my story to everybody, and I want to tell my story to ADAA, because first off, anxiety and depression are part of bipolar disorder. Now, not everybody with bipolar disorder has anxiety, and not everybody with bipolar disorder, depression is their worst symptom. It could be mania, it could be grandiosity, it could be hypersexuality. It's a complicated illness, but in general, many people with bipolar disorder experience depression and anxiety. And I want to get to those people because there could be people right now that think that it's just depression or just anxiety. And actually, it's part of something larger. And I want to make sure that anybody listening to themselves will think, I feel like maybe I have a little bit more than depression or a little bit more than anxiety. They're able to have some foundational knowledge to go to a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner or their general practitioner and say, I wasn't concerned before, but I would like to ask some questions and maybe be observed and get some follow-up. I'm not saying that means that people have bipolar disorder. It's just that I just think there's a lot of people who aren't getting the care they need because they self-diagnosed and they got a doctor to go along with it, or based on their understanding of they don't have it. For example, like we talked about at the beginning, people might be like, well, I didn't have this high-end godlike mania, so therefore I don't have bipolar disorder. But maybe they hear about some of the other symptoms, or they listen to me and they think, I don't know. Maybe I should get it checked out. And that's all I want people to do. Please do not diagnose yourself. Do not stop listening to this and think I'm bipolar. Don't do that. go to a doctor and say, I got a little more information and here's why I'm concerned. And then listen to them. And if they say, no, you have nothing to worry about, then right? That's the beauty of medical care. But maybe it is something a little more. And I think oftentimes people in the mental health spectrum, they don't understand that maybe it's a little more, maybe it's a little less, maybe it's a little different. It's just messy. It's really, really messy. And ADAA has such an incredible group of people who are learning from them. ADAA is a trusted place to learn. And that becomes a problem as well. I love being on TikTok. I love being on Instagram, but I do wonder, as people watch me, why are they listening to me? I'm not a doctor. I'm not licensed. I'm not beholden by anybody. So I could get on there tomorrow and say whatever I wanted. I don't do that, but they don't, the listeners don't know that. And that's why I love being associated with Healthline Media, right? Just to get that shameless plug in there, because they medically review everything I say. And that's why I like being involved with ADAA, because if I say something that's factually inaccurate, even accidentally, right? I'm not malicious, but if I say something that's untrue on accident, you'll make sure that it doesn't get in and that people don't hear it, because you don't want to accidentally mislead people. And that's extraordinarily valuable. And it's not something that a lot of patient influencers can afford. We can't send out all of our stuff to be medically reviewed. That would be very expensive. And well, most of us are doing this for negative amounts of money. So that's why. I know it's a stupid long answer, but at this point, you should be used to it.
I thank you so much. Well, we appreciate you sharing your personal story with ADAA. And on that, I would just like to close a little bit and share that the Anxiety and Depression Association of America works to prevent, treat, and cure anxiety disorders and depression through the alignment of science, treatment, and education. We invite you to explore our website at adaa.org, where you can find resources such as ADAA's Find Your Therapist directory, free evidence-based webinars, blogs, and videos, similar to what we are recording today, ADAA's free online peer-to-peer community, our self-help books and publication, and we'd ask that you please consider subscribing to our free monthly e-newsletter, Triumph. With that, on behalf of ADAA and our presenter, Gabe, thank you again. Wonderful to visit with you. We so value your personal story and the information and answers to my questions today. I hope to see you all again. Gabe, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.